Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar, Taking Your Leadership Development Program Virtual. I wanted to welcome you to one of our webinar program series. My name is Steve Dion, and I lead Dion Leadership, and I'm joined here today with my colleague, Terry Schell, who's been with the organization for about 4 years in doing this work together, and is our practice leader for learning and development. And over the last 6 months, it's spent a great deal of time thinking about virtual and blended learning, and will be helping me co-present today. I wanted to start, for those of you here that don't know who we are and really what we're all about. And that's really explains sort of why this topic is important to us. As a leadership development and consulting firm, we really are passionate about having employees start every day excited and end every day accomplished. And in the work that we do, that's very important to us, and we think it's going to create better organizations and really better societies. Well, in this COVID-19 world, in this new social justice movement world, in the dynamics that we have, skilling up leaders is really important. And to get to this end goal, we have to change and pivot the way we do things. So we're excited today to talk to you about what we've been doing in a case study with the client, and help you hopefully equip your organization to do some of the same things. In terms of what we do, this topic today really is covered in the leadership programs category, but we do a lot of individual leadership coaching, leadership development programs, team effectiveness, do some talent selection, work in organizational capabilities, and help clients like you integrate and bring in new products where you can train and develop yourself. But about 50% of our business is in the leadership programs arena, which is what we're talking about today. And I'm looking forward to kind of digging deeper with you on what that looks like and how you can create leadership programs to go virtual. So our specific goals for today with this no longer than an hour session will be to discuss how to best use online and proctored virtual learning to build leadership development programs. Specifically, we want to help you explore not just moving to virtual, but what does self-paced blended learning look like? And how can you integrate those easily into your practices? And then last, provide a specific client case study, which is very new, that's happened during COVID-19, of a client that had to make a mindset shift to take what was a complete classroom-based high potential leadership development program and turn it virtual. And we're going to share with you very specific and practical tips and considerations for what we learned with that program to help you in programs that you're going to hopefully execute. Just wanted to pause and say what we're not going to cover today. And we're not going to specifically cover online only learning platforms, or some organizations call them e-learning. That's not the space that we really believe in to play in for ourselves. We think there's some application for online only programs for compliance training, but what we found is there's some low adoption rate to those programs, and they especially are not as effective for teaching leadership and social emotional intelligence competency type skills. So our applications, when we talk about online learning, are really to blend with some live instructor-led programs. So with that, I wanted to start, as we like to do in many of our sessions, and do a research scan and tell you what we're seeing right now. So as of March 2020, what we found is in the data is roughly 1/2 of all in-person leadership programs have been postponed or canceled. That fits with the clients that we work with as well, and many of you online today listening to this. I know we've had the conversations about what do we do and how do we pivot. Yet many workers are working virtually. They're learning how to lead virtually, communicate, share, and we're now trying to figure out what do you do from a leadership development perspective to match the way we work and lead now. And so what we found is that instructor-led training budgets are still there. That's been one nice thing that CEOs have not said. And unlike 2008, where we found, with that economic downturn, that organizations said, we just are not going to spend money on leadership development. We're seeing organizations spending money. They're just trying to figure out how to do and deliver that. And the encouraging news is that 83% of L&D professionals report that executive buy-in is not a challenge for them. So we were excited to see that in the data, and we actually see that with the clients that we work with. So the challenge now is, how do you do this work? And other research shows, and we'll get into this more deeply, but students actually learn and retain information really well with online learning. So a lot of different data points we collected really are telling a story that leadership development is important. We need to upskill people in the new world environment. We just have to figure out how to do that. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So what's really important, and why is this important now, is there's such an increase in social and emotional intelligence skills that are needed. And leading virtually is not going away. When this pandemic started, I think a lot of us thought, well, it's going to be a month of 2 months of kind of waiting, and we'll go back to where we were. Now we're learning that isn't happening. But on top of the need to lead differently, building connection and community among leaders is going to be very important. I know organizations have different platforms to do that in the social settings, but learning and development programs are a great way to do that too. And some of the skills we're seeing that leaders need are on the screen here. And so we really need to upskill leaders. These are competencies and behaviors, as we've worked with clients over a long period of time. These words didn't come up. Talking about compassionate leadership or humanity just were not in the conversations about what strong leaders and high potential leaders do and need to do. The topic of well-being is very important now, resilience, and so the landscape for what a leader needs to be effective is different, and we need to help them teach. We need to teach them how to do those things well, and what it looks like in terms of a new mindset and a new paradigm. So let's talk first, before we get into the details though. We'd like to do a quick poll, and Lauren's going to pull this up for you and ask you for your honest personal opinion as we think about blended and virtual learning. So we know learning is important. We know we need to do something differently. Lots of ways to potentially get there. So your honest opinion, want to understand, where are you at personally with understanding both blended, meaning instructor-led and online content together and other experiences, and virtual learning versus instructor-led classroom learning? As this is coming in, I see we do have one chat. Are you able to provide some research on our sources? And absolutely we are. A couple of them you'll see in our slides highlight the specific study, but we're going to get a little bit deeper into this. And as we send out the recording, we'd be happy to send a link to some of those studies for sure. I think that's very important as you build credibility within your organization. So absolutely. So what's the data saying? The data is saying that you support a mix of both virtual and classroom at 76%. I think the more we can move to virtual, the better. That's only 15%, so people are still not all the way there. But it's good to see we only have we have one naysayer in the audience of completely, I'm not for it. We can't replicate face-to-face training. And today we are really going to talk about the blended value of this. Our view, just to put it right out there, is not that we need to move everything to virtual. That's the answer. There are definite trade-offs between what you get from a classroom learning approach and online, and we'll hopefully help you navigate when and how you do that. So that's good data to see. Thank you very much for that. So we can speak to that. So I'm going to turn over to Terry now, and we can kind of ground ourselves a little bit deeper in the subject.
Hi, everybody. What I want to get clear is a baseline for us to talk about the terminology so that we have some shared understanding as we go forward through this presentation of what we're talking about by the terms we're referencing. We talk about, as we've talked about already, face-to-face versus virtual. Certainly that's pretty obvious when you're in a classroom setting versus having a situation where an instructor is online and giving a presentation through some sort of meeting software. We've talked about instructor-led and contrasting that with self-paced. So again, when instructor is leading students in a live setting versus work that a learner is doing on their own, assignments that are done. I call this the heads down work. Things that are self-paced that they can do at their leisure, on their own schedule, and at their own pace. When we talk about blended learning, we talk about combining 2 or more modes of instruction, such as instructor-led and self-paced. Having facilitated sessions with someone who's a leader or a coach, or who's guiding a group through, or having individuals work on their own. And other terms that come up a lot when we talk about virtual learning are the idea of having a proctor, and we'll get into that shortly, somebody who's behind the scenes. We talk about microlearning. Microlearning is literally learning that can happen in small bites, and it can be supported in a variety of ways, whether online or whether through job aids or other toolkits that happen. Enrichment activities, we've used this term in our classroom-based learning to talk about activities that are done outside of that classroom. And as you'll see when we talk about our case study, what we were able to do is take these enrichment activities that were kind of nice to have add-ons and fully integrate them into the curriculum. LMS, Learning Management System. We have adopted a learning management system to organize and deliver or present or allow access to the content for our courses. And so we'll talk about that as well. Authoring tools utilized to put together online learning, e-learnings, and they tend to be intact learning experiences that are self-paced often. And then e-learning, again, another term that we use a lot to talk about learning that happens online. In our vernacular, we refer to that as something that doesn't have an instructor-led component to it, but could be part of a blended learning solution. So we were talking about research a few minutes ago. Some of the research we did involved a case study where there was a comparison between a classroom-led version of a class and a virtual instructor-led version of a class. And the results of that research was that 86% of the participants rated their experience with the virtual session as being as engaging or even more engaging than classroom, and 100% said they were satisfied with the virtual learning experience. And this was an encouraging and validating study that showed that virtual learning does have its place and does offer opportunities for success, and in a way that we've always almost taken for granted in a classroom setting.
And this was published in a 2016 Training Magazine article, and like I said, we can happily send that link so you don't have to go and hunt and find that.
Another study that is often cited, you'll see the results here, compared e-learning and blended learning versions of a course. And the blended learning group found that they could give high ratings to the course because they found it useful based upon what they learned, and that they intended to recommend the course to others. And again, by combining those different learning modalities, you hit at the different preferences and learning styles of your learner population and increase the likelihood that you will have a good outcome. So everybody's seen the quote that's at the bottom of the bottom of the slide, excuse me, the teach a man to fish, or give a man a fish and teach a man to fish idea that's been out there. And what we wanted to present here is a continuum of sorts that leads us from our instructor-led group learning events, and how combining that with self-paced learning and will help to create a culture where learning is a part of the way of working. It's not something that you step away and do. It's something that is just part of how your professional activities go. And the ultimate result being accountability. What we're looking to build in our learners is accountability for their development, accountability for their learning. And by presenting different opportunities to learn and keeping it going, especially during a crisis situation like we have now, we can create accountability for our learner populations to continue their development, to continue gaining new skills, practicing them, trying them out, supporting each other. And so that's what we're ultimately looking to accomplish with our learning programs.
Accountability in learning is something that we've been striving for a long time. And one of the challenges can be with a classroom program is people do their job. They walk into the classroom and say, now teach me, give me the information. Let's do this here. I learn this by the time I fly back home, get back in the work environment. Is all of that knowledge getting transferred? So accountability to do this during your workday, learning how to learn while you do is really important. And that's one of the benefits we think we can have with a program like this. We had an internal meeting earlier this week with our coaches and consultants, and one of our folks reminded me that we have a leading virtual teams course that we've had for years, and our clients wanted us to fly people together to teach a leading virtual teams course. And at the time we said, really? Like, we could do this and should do this virtually. And that wasn't where their head was at. And trying to replicate how we're going to work and lead is really important. So in that case, particularly, it's about leading people that you're not face-to-face with. We need to practice that in the way we do this work. And so a lot of the content that we can teach virtually will replicate how we'll be having conversations for the next who knows how long as we continue to figure out how to get back to work. But specifically, why and how do we do this? I wanted to pause for a minute, and this is a well-established model and study that you can read about as well, that's called the AGES model. I spoke a little bit to this in our last webinar for just a second, but wanted to give a little bit more attention to this in terms of when you develop curriculum, when we try to change learner behavior, what are we doing? Whether it was in a classroom-based program or event, whether it's in an individual coaching session using that modality, or it's some blended or virtual learning environment, what we're trying to do and need to do are these 4 particular items. And why is this? So first, it starts with attention, that we need to get the learner's attention by focusing on one topic at a time. And what that does from a neuroscience research perspective, and this is well established scientifically, is it activates a part in our brain called the hippocampus, who then says, hey, I'm supposed to be learning something here. Well, what do I need to learn? Why do I need to learn it? And it gets you focused on bringing something new into your purview. So you're not just sitting there, but you're actually going to make eventual behavior change. Then what we want to do is to generate. And what generating is doing is it's helping to engage somebody. So you could say this is engagement in a sense, is the idea of adult learner theory, you learn by doing. So actively being a participant in learning something. Unfortunately, a webinar like this is actually not replicating virtual learning at all. This is a one-way approach. This is not what happens when we teach a classroom-based event. Every 3 minutes, 2-3 minutes, you'll be doing something to learn, apply, talk. But in a setting like this with hundreds of people on the line, you really can't do that. But what we're trying to do in this learner model is to generate new ideas and help somebody understand why it's important. On top of that, we want to create emotion to it. So what emotion does is it connects to somebody individually, and each person's emotions around a topic could be very different. So understanding different styles and approaches and what you value is important. But that scientifically, again, from a neuroscience perspective, is it activates the amygdala, which signals, hey, I need to do something with this information. I value it so much, and I want to create joy in the process of learning. So I say, this is something I want to keep. And so all the things that come in and out of my day, I'm going to keep this information. And we do that through emotion. And then the last piece, and this is where, when we think about classroom versus blended learning, is getting, and the trade-offs between those two is in spacing. So spacing is then after you've kind of understood this is important, you had a connection to say, I need to put this in my short-term memory. To keep it in long-term memory, we need to pull that out, apply it and use it, put it back in, pull it out and apply it and use it and put it back in. That comes from spacing. And if you do a learning event, you might be able to, be higher on emotion because you're all in a classroom and can do some pretty fun interactive activities. However, you might lose a little bit in spacing. So the challenge then, if you're doing virtual or blended learning or online learning, is to weave in the generation or emotion activities in there. But as we think about this, a balance of all four of these are where we're really going to get learner behavior to change. And we think this is important as you think about developing any content or curriculum.
We have in chat a comment here about still wonder how to replicate the water cooler conversations that happen organically at a conference or in the class. And that's absolutely something that we have talked extensively about with our clients, and it came up when we talked with the case study that we'll be talking about in a moment. That was definitely a dynamic that we looked to honor and replicate. Because you're right, there's so much connections gets made in the off hours, people getting to know each other, making those connections with their colleagues, and building those relationships. Steve mentioned the word trade-offs earlier, and that's a really good summary of how we see the move to virtual learning. Right now, we're not having people stand around a water cooler. It's just not in the cards at the moment, and it may not be for a while. So what can we do to still support those types of connections? How can we come close to that? How can we replicate that? And hopefully in the future, how can we still have those types of opportunities and maybe even have that in-person option as part of our ultimate blended learning? I talked about blended learning being one or two or more modalities. Maybe there's opportunity across a full-scale leadership development program where those in-person opportunities are there in the future. But you're also taking those and combining that with opportunities for self-paced work and virtual learning. So we see that as an extension and something that we work to engage those connections in the virtual format and in the blended format. Certainly nothing replicates being in person and those types of connections, but we do our best to make sure that we can enable those nonetheless. And with that, talking about enabling those types of connections, this slide here is some content from McKinsey and a summary that they did about facilitating live virtual sessions and the idea of planning and follow-up and the importance of those. From a planning standpoint, certainly the technology piece of this and making sure people have materials is paramount. One of the things that we have with this presentation and that we do with our virtual learning sessions is we have a moderator, a proctor, a producer, somebody who is working behind the scenes. That's Lauren. Who makes sure that the technology is going smoothly. She works with our learners. If they're having any issues, they can contact her directly. And it frees the instructor up to truly focus on facilitation. They don't have to worry about pressing buttons or, doing two things at once. They can focus on the learners, focus on the content, and focus on enabling the interactions and doing all of that they need to do. And as we found, and certainly the McKinsey study shows, that's absolutely critical.
You know what, and I was gonna say, this study is one of many. We didn't reference this earlier, but I'm holding up this month's Talent Development magazine, and the cover is in-person versus virtual for training. And this subject is hot. It's topical, yes, but we believe that there's gonna be a fundamental shift in the way learning will happen. We've been talking about computer-based training that turned into e-learning or web-based training for a long period of time, and it hasn't fully stuck because there wasn't a galvanizing force around it. Now, with so much of society working from home and working remotely, and I just saw some studies yesterday of how people are going back to work. Large percentage of employees are saying they're not fully going to go back to the office until next year. There's still questions on what percent will go back at all. There's it's going to rechange the footprint of when and how people are going to work, and that's just going to have a broader need for making this happen. Go ahead.
One moment. Yeah. The middle piece of here, the during the session piece of it, I'm not going to read it to you, but we found that what McKinsey summarized here is absolutely accurate and is exactly how we have been moving forward, and we find that works. And also the last part. So we were very pleased to find, and we are glad to report that Steve referenced the different studies that are coming out about this, and the things that they're promoting and the things that they're mentioning as effective. We are absolutely finding that those are completely accurate. So definitely, you know, heed those. They definitely work.
But adoption is still a challenge. It sounds good to say this and talk about it, but doing it is another matter. So to get deeper into our case study, this is a great example to show in real time what happened. And I think in our introduction to joining this webinar, we had mentioned that I think it was like March 6th or something, we literally had a 2-day live program for a high potential group. We were flying there, decided as everything was shutting down, let's cancel that. And this was for this company, which is a global tier 1 auto supplier, Japanese corporate office, 170,000 employees. And we were doing the 4th part of this multi-part classroom-based program, where they also have 12 coaching sessions that we provide a separate leadership coach for each participant. They do a business project, and we were bringing our facilitator together to teach the final set of modules. And this is a truly high potential group of people. They have a very rigorous selection process for how they get into the program. We use Hogan, and we help them interpret that data even before they can get into the program. They have to pass certain, internal performance metrics. So really high profile group of people. So we had to pivot and say, what do? Do we just wait and see when the world starts spinning again, or do we go do something different? This is generally what their program looked like, and we just took this out of the webinar kickoff we did for the program, almost a year earlier. You can see there's lots of pieces and moving parts, but at the time, workshop 1, workshop 2, it was a workshop-based program. It wasn't virtual, it wasn't blended. The organization wasn't there to do that. We had the capabilities at the time, and they just said, we value face-to-face workshops. Again, this is a snippet out of their material from a year ago. So then what did we need to do? Well, this was the program. It's called the Regional Leadership Development Program. And what I'm specifically speaking about today is this organizational capabilities module. So they presented this, and we were to be together with that group for a few days to unpack a set of competencies as part of this program. And I want to share with you how we thought about doing things differently, how to replicate the feel of let's all fly in together, let's get community, some executives were going to be there, we break bread together, we get together in the evening, we have the water cooler talk, all the stuff that you need to do. How do we replicate that in a very meaningful way for these participants?
So this is the original model of the 4th session that we were doing for this program. And it included 4 modules, 4 different topics that they were covering over 2 days, and they were each half-day programs. One of them had there was no pre-work that was done for them, but one of them did have an assessment using the influence style indicator assessment, which is then referenced and utilized throughout the program. So what the challenge was then was to take this content and say, okay, how do we present this virtually and make it a good learning experience, just as it would have been if everybody had been together in the classroom. So this is how we ended up presenting it. They surveyed their group and said, what schedule works for you? How should we do this? And they chose to do this actually over 3 weeks. They wanted to do 2 of the modules 1 week, skip a week, and then do 2 of the modules for the 3rd week. And this is how we broke it up. We broke it up into 5 pieces, where we took starting with our original content, which would have been 4 hours to deliver in the classroom, and reimagined how we would deliver it from a virtual setting. So what we did first was created some pre-work from that. And I was telling Steve before we had this session, I've just recently had this epiphany that going forward, I don't want to call it pre-work anymore, because I feel that it sort of diminishes it or makes it feel less important than the instructor-led piece of it. And going forward, one of the lessons learned is I would present this as a 5-part program. And the first part is work that's done self-paced. And so what we did was, from our original content, took out work that I referred to heads down work previously. That's what we took out of that. So it was initial reflection work. There was some exposition where we talk about definitions and set the stage for everybody having a common understanding. Some individual self-assessments that they would do normally in a class. In their books, they would look down and assess themselves maybe on some best practices or other behaviors, just to kind of, again, rate themselves against what they're going to be learning. We took that all out and put that up front. What we were also able to do then is take what we had previously called enrichment activities and that we had used for this program and build them into that first part. So we were able to offer links to some video content, some TED Talks or other content that we thought was relevant and a great supplement to our own content, and some reading, maybe some articles, things that got them thinking about the topic from a few different angles. And typically those were set up such as, you're going to watch this video, here's some specific things to really pay attention to, and then afterwards they had a reflection opportunity where they would be asked some specific questions about it. So it wasn't just watching this in a void, in a vacuum, it was very directed, how to read this, how to view this. And then they came together for the instructor-led session. Everything they did in that first part as pre-work or as self-paced work was then referenced in that instructor-led session. And what we focused on in the instructor-led session then was, it was like a concentrated experience. So using the technology that we have using Zoom, which is what we do use, we were able to take the activities that we would normally do in a classroom, such as partner work or breakout groups, table work, and utilize the technology by using the breakout rooms. We utilized the annotate and the whiteboard technology in ways that we might use flip charts or hand raises in the classroom. We were, Zoom has these emoticons or icons that you can use to indicate agreement, to raise your hand. We utilize those as checking our pace or checking for agreement or making sure everybody's on board and moving along with us. So we took advantage of certainly of chat and of the ability to just speak and present to each other through the technology. And we were able to take that original content, make some modifications so that we could still reach our learning goals, and with the idea of keeping people engaged so that they were interacting with their screens and not just sitting there watching passively. Then we built in a third segment, which was an intersession assignment. Again, it could be a video, it could be something they read, or it could be an actual assignment. One of the assignments that we had for courageous leadership, for example, was to interview somebody in their organization that they find particularly courageous or even just accomplished, and ask them about what being a courageous leader means to them in their organization and whether their organizational culture supports courage or not. And then, again, this was about 30 minutes worth of work. When they got back to the next instructor-led session, they talked about that. They debriefed on that. What did they learn? It was an opportunity to get some perspective from other leaders and learn about their organization in that particular topic. And they went through that second instructor-led session, again, based upon our original content. And then the fifth part of the program was what we called our post-session challenges. And this is where we're sending people off to try and apply what they learned. And we set up typically for these programs 4 or 5 post-session challenges. All of them have complete your action planning, and action planning remains a key part of our virtual content. Complete your action plans, share it with your manager. Teach this to somebody else, present this to your team, try this model out and report back how it goes. Create a learning cohort or learning partnership with somebody else in this class where you commit to reporting back to each other or getting together, let's say in 30 days and 90 days to talk about what's working for you, what's not. And some that are specific to that content. So the idea is when they leave, their learning is not over, they're still applying it and working on this. So we were able to take what otherwise would have been a total of 16 hours in the classroom. we estimate that it was still about the same amount of learning time ultimately that was spread over, well, ultimately 3 weeks. But we just came at the content a different way and met our learning objectives a different way, and allowed this program to go forward, and for these learners to complete that 4th session of that learning program that they had otherwise done in person.
So for this program, it may not be obvious on the screen, but the choice was we do 1 week, and it was every afternoon, like from 2 to 3:30 with these 90-minute sessions, and the other activities were paced without. We took a week off, and then we did the 2nd week. You'll see in the debrief from the client, this worked really well. For another organization we're doing literally today, we're proctoring this afternoon, their program was a 4-part, 1-day program that was again going to be in-person classroom that we pivoted to this. And we picked a cadence that fit for the content in them. And in 1 day, we had a session in the morning, a couple-hour break, and a session in the afternoon. We had a day off, then we got this afternoon. They do work in between. So there's lots of creative ways to replug the learner into the work based on the type of content and the schedule that the organization has. The other thing I wanted to mention, because Terry was educating me on this a little bit earlier, is we use the word pre-work here. And that's a mindset shift that we suggest everybody needs to make now, from this idea of the session is the work and there's either a pre or a post, that this is really a 5-part program where they're doing some things individually. It's not less important, it's as important. And then it prepares them to do something else next, that then it prepares them to do something individually next after that. So it's a process, it's a sequence of learning, and to just kind of rethink our mindset of how we package this material for when you think about a blended program.
There's a comment in chat that asks, have you ever used or experienced with an external chat feature that allows for continued engagement outside of sessions? We did not build that into this first go-round that we have, but that's absolutely our intention, to have some sort of place. And I believe the LMS that we've adopted supports that. We just haven't gotten to that piece of it yet, where there can be opportunities for discussion, a separate area for people to post questions or talk about their experiences outside of the classroom, get feedback, support each other. So that is absolutely something that we consider an important feature that we intend to build into our programs. We're just not there yet.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we've actually seen some emerging research that does show that learners want a community of learning. Not unlike people being on their social platforms with Facebook and other opportunities to share and have content. I think it's what we're thinking about, though, is it can be tricky for when and how much. Not every person wants to engage that way. So we've been talking about with other programs. We have a 3rd program that's kicking off right now that's going to be a complete virtual program that we had participants. It's the 2nd year of a program that we have for people in Australia, in Brazil, in the US, and trying to replicate that water cooler and social element we've been chatting about already, is to do some activities in between that might be their leader has an interaction with them, another person in the program. We've talked about maybe participants of graduates from the 1st program get assigned to people in this program, and then we can use our learning tool to have that step in there. Make sure you made that connection, chat about it so you don't forget to do that, and it gives the learner basically some project management support to be a good learner in this program. But there's lots of ways to get the interactions that you want to have. It's just doing it in smaller bite-sized ways.
And one of the comments or one of the chat entries talks about using MS Teams for cohorts to connect together. Absolutely a fantastic idea. We find that our clients more and more are using Teams. It's growing by leaps and bounds in all of the features that it has. And as we talked about, having some sort of discussion place, whether it's something that we host through our LMS or that our clients decide to make space for using Microsoft Teams, it's absolutely a great component to have for any leadership learning program.
Yeah, we use Teams as well ourselves. We have clients. They have a program where we're going to do with the client. They want to put 300 people through a time management program, but since they communicate with teams, we're going to use their team's platform.
Yeah.
What we can't do, unfortunately, is they don't have breakout functionality, but a lot of other functionality is there that we can design or use. So I think there was a chat too, what technology, Adobe Connect, go to webinar or meeting, Zoom, they all have a lot of the same features and functionalities. A really important part is just in the design of using all those. It's not easy to just remember on the fly as a facilitator to say, let's use raise your hand or chat feature or something right now. We have to blend it into the work that we do. And when you do, this is what the type of feedback we get from a learner.
So as you can see on the slide, this was, we just collected this in the last couple of days. Our level 1 evals, we were really pleased to see some strong positive feedback from the learner group regarding the facilitation style, and that they thought it was a good investment of their time, and that they feel like they can contribute to their organization. And that was, we were very pleased and relieved to see that the program worked for the learners, because that's ultimately what it's about. We can think it's super great and we've dazzled ourselves, but if the learners aren't learning, if it's not a good experience for them, then we haven't done our jobs. So we were very pleased to see that we got some good feedback from that group.
And these are the same questions that we ask regularly, whether it's a classroom-based program or not. And this is similar to the data that we would see regularly in the 80% of people that answer these same questions. So point being that because we did this virtually, and remember, this group saw 3 in-person, warm cookie, nice dinner events, and they still rate it equally as valuable by doing this in a Zoom-based way, in their, shorts at their home office. And then to close the case study, this is a quote. Unfortunately, our client was not able to join us on this in terms of their schedule. So we just said, hey, can you give us something that we could share about what you thought about moving this virtual? And this was their quote. So we thought we'd put it in here directly. And honestly, it gives me an opportunity to say thanks to my team, thanks to Terry, thanks to Teresa, the facilitator, to Lauren, the proctor, to Taylor, our account executive, to transition this work. And you can see in the way this is written, they had to be convinced to do this as well. And they would tell you that. And, we realize that our learning and development client partner, their performance is based on how well these go. And when they hire us to do that, that's a tough day and night because it's a reflection on them. And so, they're happy about it. As we debriefed it, we're talking about next year's program. And they even said, even if we are all back to work, there's a vaccine, it all is, back to where we were, I can see at least 1 or 2 of the 4-part program to remain virtual.
In our comments, Cindy commented that a client she worked with had cookies and lunch delivered to the learners at home. That's a really neat touch for an organization to do, something to make it extra special. In fact, we'll get to that. That reminds me of the next slide.
Yeah, so in our last little section, I want to do one more quick poll and help you guys see where you're all at in terms of your plan to deliver leadership training. So if Lauren, you could open up the poll. It gives you some options, everything from we already have put in place virtual or online programs to we're not providing training at all and some scale. So thought we could help you kind of see what's going on within our community. Things are coming in. A couple more, please. Okay, we'll end the poll here and let's see what we get. So, wow, tied between pretty close to people have already put in place new virtual and online courses, and they're beginning to rethink ways of delivering training. Good to see that people are just not holding off and not doing anything at all. And that they already have programs in place. So that's great. And if we have a little bit more time, we'd love to hear in our chat or open up our conversation about what you're individually doing as well. So people are embracing it as we're reading about. So that's good news.
So these are really our top 5 tips for virtual learning. If we had to share anything about what we've learned, these are our main lessons right now. Number 3, I'm reminded of in particular, the if you can't fix it, feature it, I think goes perfectly with Cindy's note about her experience where an organization had sent out lunch to the participants' homes. It's really embracing that. This is a phrase that one of our consultants uses often, and we've adopted it because it really works to this situation where we're just accepting the reality of our current situation, certainly with with our learners having to be at home or someplace other than the classroom, and taking advantage of how we can make the most of that and turning it into a really good experience, whether it's something light and such as sending lunch, or having what I've seen some people have done where you do the training wearing some ridiculous hat that you found in your house, or you give people a tour of your home, or you take a break and everybody shows their pet or something. The idea is, find creative, light ways, or even within your content, impactful ways to really make the most of the experience.
And that speaks back to those earlier competencies we were even talking about. Not do you have to just teach it, but we can replicate what's important by what we talk about here. So things like compassion, humanity, agility, using the way we even do this work to have people practice those skills in this. I also wanted to just, before we move on to our last section here on the blended learning piece, I want to quickly say that with number 2, design and use technology every 3 to 5 minutes. In the case study we just did, a quote that we had that we didn't put in there was most of the participants said, wow, the 1.5 hour live proctored sessions flew. I was surprised. I was shocked. We weren't sure I didn't expect to honestly see that many comments about how quick each session, and that's, 8 sessions or something. Well, the reason it did flow, I don't think it was a brilliant model that they were, staring at. It was that this was designed in a way to keep them very interactive with their computer screen, with talking to somebody else, with using all the Zoom-based technology. And so they were engaged in using that AGES model. That's really what you have to do. That doesn't just happen with a great facilitator who can, talk well and tell good stories. So with that.
So I'm just going to give a walkthrough of what our actual content looked like for this learning experience. As I had mentioned previously, it was a combination of curated content, proprietary content. It was placed we utilized a document repository, or our LMS, as to create a learning path for the participants and a workflow for them to get from point A to point B with their learning. And we also built in their self-reflection opportunities so that they weren't just not just engaging with content being thrown at them, but they had the time to process it. So this next slide is taken directly from our LMS, and it shows all of the different elements of our 5-part learning program that we put together for our clients. The first piece, which is still called self-paced pre-work, it starts with it's an LMS where they get a link to access it, and it's something that we've built and customized and branded on our own. But the first thing they see is a welcome video from the instructor that says, welcome to this program, this is who I am, this is what we're going to learn, something to get them going. We envision using this for videos for if there was an organization had a leader or a CEO that wanted to send a message. We can build all of that in, but the idea is that this is something that can be customized to whatever a learner group needs. We have opportunities in there for journal entries. We have just some text that they use. We don't want to burden people down with reading, but something that orients them to the work that they're doing. And as you'll see as you go down here, there's a self-assessment piece, some video pieces, and where all of this content is orienting them and getting them ready for that first instructor-led session.
So practically speaking too, a participant is engaging with this because we've set them up as a learner. They get an email that says, welcome to this learning platform, log in here, or download this app and do it on your phone. So this is all available easily through either a phone, a tablet, or a computer, so people can learn at a time and place where it's important to them.
Yes, absolutely. And here's some examples of what it looks like in our LMS. Starting off in our courageous leadership, one of the first reflections they do is they start thinking about courage. And what they have the opportunity to do here with the system is write their response to this prompt. This is something they normally would do in class, in the classroom, with the instructor-led piece, that heads down work. But they have the opportunity to do it up front. When they submit it, then they're able to move on. On the back end, we can collect all of these submissions that they put in, and we did not do this time around, but we can return those to the learners if we needed to, or otherwise collect them, or it can be something that the instructor can review to really get a pulse on what that learner group is all about. So this is just an example.
And to the earlier comment about building community, you can see just built into technology, and this is one platform, this is the one that we liked a lot, but a lot of them have this. You can record a video, you could record audio, you can upload a file. So there's opportunities for you to say something and you could give that to somebody else to learn and look at and comment on. And there's lots of ways to do this versus just typing in text.
There's a comment in chat about following the discussion thread of using various technologies to deliver content. Do you see that clients' users might be overwhelmed with having to use 2 or 3, 4 different technologies? That has not been our experience so far. I get where you're coming from. We have not found that to be a problem.
What we have done, though, is a best practice, too, with using Zoom. There are still clients who, I mean, most people have heard of Zoom, but some people still have not been on Zoom. So when we start, we send out a quick tutorial video that says, if you haven't used Zoom before, familiarize yourself with these features. When we set up the first class, Lauren's putting up a PowerPoint slide that rotates Zoom features. Like, where do you find the smiley face? And, but it's very easy, click, 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 you can do those things. So after one experience, we found most people have settled into understanding how it works.
This slide is another example of just a text page where it's, again, just orienting, giving some definitions and some background to the content. This is a screenshot of a survey question. So as they move through their learning path, learners have the opportunity to have these different types of interactions. This is just an example of that. And this is an example of where we were able to add a video, this TED Talk here from this author who specializes in leadership courage. And you can see there's some specific instructions in there for the learners about what to focus on as they watch this video. So that was just some basic elements of a much longer program, but just to see what the learner interaction looks like from our standpoint.
And just quickly, I would say too, if anybody wants to actually see a demo of this technology, we'd be happy to let Lauren know. We can set up a time. We didn't want to spend a lot of time walking through, but if you really wanted to see the workflow, we could send you as a learner what a path would look like, so you could see and emulate that.
Previously, what we would have done in this situation is just send a series of links, or maybe a Word document with links on it, which will work if you're looking for a blended approach. That's not, there's nothing wrong with that. What we like about this LMS that we've started using is that everything is collected in one place, and it allows that consistent access. So nobody's saying, oh, I lost the email, I didn't get it, it's in my spam. It just allowed us a much smoother, more direct mode of access for our learners. And we've talked a little bit about this already, about the instructor-led sessions and the modes of engagement that we've utilized using Zoom and using the technology to both present the content and have users interact with that. Our contact from the case study, we were just speaking to him yesterday. He said, I was never bored. He said, I was constantly moving and doing something and didn't have time to get bored because I was interacting so much. And he meant that in a positive way. We threw in this graphic here, which is from that talent development article that just came out, that shows how the various activities and learning activities you might have in a classroom session, such as brainstorming, demonstrations, discussion, the different technologies that can enable those when you're using a virtual session. So we wanted to reference this just to show you that there's some really good resources out there for helping to support you with this.
And to also remember to use the technology to get to a certain learning objective. Don't just use it because it's fun or cool to use. Like, oh, I felt like I have to use chat now. Well, why are you using chat? Should you use polls? Should you open up conversation? You know, there's lots of ways to get there, and this can help you kind of navigate that.
Yeah. And this, we actually had this in here before we found that TD graphic, and the idea was to show the comparison between how we might take something that we did it in the classroom and convert it to something that we get an equivalent learning experience, equivalent objective reaching, utilizing the technology of the virtual platforms.
So what we've done to date, and this is a snippet from our website of the courses we already had in a catalog that were traditional courses, everywhere from a half day to 4 days worth of content. And you can see where we have a blended virtual program already. I could imagine fast forward 6 months, there'll be a little icon next to almost every one of these. There may be certain courses that we say this isn't the right mode to do this. We're going to save it for a classroom. Not everything we think can be replicated this way, but we think there's lots of them that can. And so in closing, I know we have just a couple of minutes left. I just wanted to close by saying we really believe that you should think about instructor-led and virtual learning not as a second-rate program to classroom, but it's different. There are good and bad applications for it and reasons for it, but to use it as another tool in your toolkit is very important to do. We believe face-to-face learning will return, but not at the same rate. And thinking about how your workforce is going to work and lead, and how often, based on what you do, will the leader and the employee be face-to-face? Will they be virtual? And if they're going to be more virtual, be great at being virtual. Learn and lean into being a virtual leader. And to do that, you have to upskill leaders, and they have to practice it using technology like this and get comfortable by doing it and doing it and doing it again.
One thing I do want to mention, I attended a webinar yesterday, and one of the things that really stuck with me was the idea of it doesn't have to be perfect. If you're delaying doing your leadership program this way because you think you need to have a perfect program out there, you may be doing your organization a disservice. And if you're just not doing anything at all because you're not sure how to do it, that time that you're not spending on leadership development and where it's just stagnant could really be something that harms the organization further ahead down the road. So the idea is, even if it's not perfect, even if it seems kind of cobbled to you, it's still worth the investment, was the message from that webinar. And that just kind of resonated with me, and I wanted to share that with you.
So in closing, one or two really quick other announcements I wanted to make. One is, if you are looking for any certifications yourself, I just wanted to share that we are doing Everything DISC virtual workshop facilitation that has, similar to what we're talking about today, pre-work, or pre-work. First module is self-study content, and then there's 3 live proctored sessions, and then in between there's more self-study work, and then you take an exam, and it allows you the ability to be certified to be an Everything DISC workplace facilitator. That's open, and you can see that on our website. We also have put together a whole series of more topical items. Some of these are virtual learning courses like Leading in a Crisis, Building Resilience. If you have any other needs related to learning topics that you don't see in the catalog you might have for us, just know that we've developed some new crisis and other topical areas that are really important. You can find that on our COVID-19 ribbon. And then our next webinar is we'll be sending out a link shortly to it, will be a coaches panel. We're excited to bring 4 of our esteemed, experienced executive coaches together to run a discussion and dialogue about how they're coaching leaders through what is a very unique year, 2020. So mark your calendars for that if that's of interest to you. It'll be at 11 a.m. on Tuesday, July 14th. More to follow. So thank you very much for joining today. And we appreciate your time and attention. And do feel free to call us if there's anything we can do to help you in any way, shape, or form.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.